The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the parched Nevada desert as Yates Paxton rode toward Ely, his weary stallion kicking up dust with each labored step. 3 days of hard riding had left him bone-tired, but the promise of a warm meal and whiskey at the end of the trail kept him moving forward through the cooling evening air. It was 1876, and the country was celebrating its centennial while Yates was simply trying to outrun his past. At 28, he had already lived several lifetimes' worth of troubles. The war between the states had claimed his youth, the cattle business had taken his savings, and a woman in Cheyenne had broken what remained of his heart. As Yates crested the final hill before the mining town of Ely, he noticed something unusual against the backdrop of crimson and gold stretching across the western sky. A small, crumpled figure sat slumped beside the road, head bowed in defeat. Drawing closer, Yates realized it was a woman. Her dress was torn and dusty, her dark hair falling in tangles around her face. One shoe was missing entirely, the other hanging precariously from her foot, its laces undone. The woman didn't look up as he approached, seemingly unaware or unconcerned about a stranger's arrival. Yates reined in his horse and studied her cautiously. Lone women on desert roads at sunset rarely meant anything good in his experience. Still, he couldn't simply ride past. "Madam," he called softly, "are you in need of assistance?" When she finally raised her head, Yates felt something shift inside him. Despite the dirt smudged across her face and the exhaustion evident in her posture, she was strikingly beautiful. But it was the profound sadness in her eyes that caught and held him, a familiar darkness he recognized from his own reflection. "I don't think anyone can help me now," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Yates dismounted, approaching slowly to avoid startling her. "My name's Yates Paxton. I'm heading into Ely for the night. It's not safe out here after dark." "Nothing's safe anywhere," she murmured, but offered nothing more. Kneeling beside her, Yates noticed the blisters on her exposed foot and the way she cradled her right arm against her body. Whatever journey had brought her here had clearly been harsh. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her partially shod foot. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. With careful movements, Yates took her remaining shoe, a once fine leather boot now worn and cracked, and gently slipped it more securely onto her foot. His calloused fingers worked the laces with surprising dexterity, tying them securely. "You're broken down, madam," he said simply, his voice low and gentle. "And night's coming. Rest with me. Tomorrow will be time enough to sort things out." A flicker of something, perhaps hope, perhaps simply resignation, crossed her face. "My name is Nora Zeller." "Miss Zeller," Yates acknowledged with a slight nod. "Can you stand?" When she tried and faltered, Yates carefully lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. She was light in his arms, too light, as though she'd been without proper meals for some time. "I don't know you," she said suddenly, as if just realizing the potential danger of her situation. "No, madam, you don't," Yates agreed. "But I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm in my company. We'll get you a proper meal and a safe place to sleep in town." As they rode toward the scattered lights of Ely now glimmering in the gathering dusk, Nora Zeller remained silent, her body tense against his. Yates didn't press for her story. The West was full of people running from something, himself included. Whatever ghosts chased this woman, they would still be there in the morning. The main street of Ely was alive with the usual evening activities of a mining town. Men stumbled from the saloon, their pockets lighter after a day's wages spent on cards and whiskey. A piano played somewhere, slightly out of tune but enthusiastic nonetheless. The general store was closing up for the night, the proprietor sweeping the wooden boardwalk clean of the day's dust. Yates guided his horse to the modest hotel at the end of the street. The Silver Dollar wasn't fancy, but it was clean, and the owner, Mrs. Fletcher, ran a respectable establishment. "Wait here," he told Nora, helping her down and settling her on a bench outside before heading inside to secure rooms. Mrs. Fletcher looked up from her ledger, her eyebrows raising at the sight of the dusty cowboy. "Mr. Paxton back in Ely again?" "Yes, madam," Yates replied, removing his hat politely. "I need 2 rooms, please. One for myself and one for a lady in distress." Mrs. Fletcher's expression shifted to concern. "Trouble? Not of my making," Yates assured her. "Found her on the road outside town. She's in need of shelter and perhaps a doctor's attention." The older woman nodded briskly. "Room 3 for you as usual, and room 5 for the lady. It's smaller but has a nice view of the mountains. I'll send up some hot water and food." She paused, then added in a lower voice, "Doc Sullivan's likely at the saloon. I'll send word." "Much obliged," Yates replied, placing coins on the counter. When he returned outside, Nora hadn't moved from the bench. Her eyes tracked the movements of passers-by warily. "I've secured you a room," Yates told her, "and Mrs. Fletcher is arranging for some hot water and food. There's a doctor in town who can look at your injuries." Nora's expression clouded. "I have no money to pay for such things." "Consider it taken care of," Yates replied simply. When she began to protest, he held up a hand. "You can settle accounts when you're back on your feet if that's your preference." He helped her inside and up the narrow staircase, aware of how she flinched at the sound of heavy footsteps or raised voices from the street below. Each reaction told him a little more about what might have driven her to that lonely road. Mrs. Fletcher appeared with a skeleton key and opened room 5, revealing a small but tidy space with a narrow bed, washstand, and chair. "I'll bring up that water directly," she promised, her kind eyes assessing Nora with professional discretion. Once alone with Nora in the room, Yates felt suddenly awkward. "I'll leave you to rest. My room is just down the hall if you need anything. The doctor should be by shortly." Nora sank onto the edge of the bed, looking small against the faded quilt. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Paxton?" "You don't know me." Yates considered the question carefully. "Out here we look after those in need. Tomorrow's never guaranteed, especially in a land that takes more than it gives." Something in his words seemed to reach her, and she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said softly. "Rest now," he advised, backing toward the door. "Things often look different after sleep and a meal." As Yates closed the door behind him, he wondered what exactly he had gotten himself into. He had planned to spend just one night in Ely before continuing north to the ranch where a job might be waiting. Now, he felt inexplicably tethered to this mysterious woman and her unknown troubles. In his own room, Yates washed the trail dust from his face and changed his shirt before heading downstairs. If he was going to help Nora Zeller, he needed information, and in a town like Ely, information flowed freely at the bottom of a whiskey glass. The prospector's dream saloon was doing brisk business when Yates pushed through the swinging doors. The air inside was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. He made his way to the bar, nodding to a few familiar faces. "Paxton," the bartender acknowledged, sliding a glass toward him without being asked. "Thought you'd left these parts for good." "Just passing through, Morris," Yates replied, tossing back the whiskey and feeling its familiar burn. "Looking for work up north." Morris refilled the glass. "Heard the Walker outfit's hiring. Lost some men to that business with the McDermott brothers last month." Yates nodded, having heard rumors of the bloody dispute over cattle theft that had left several cowboys dead. "Any strangers been through town recently? Besides myself, that is." Morris wiped the bar with a rag that might once have been white. Few drummers, usual prospectors. Oh, and there was that fancy fellow asking questions a couple days back, claimed to be looking for his runaway wife. The bartender leaned closer. Had the look of a man who don't take disappointment well, if you catch my meaning. Yates kept his expression neutral despite the sudden tension in his shoulders. Describe him. Tall, well-dressed, Eastern cut to his clothes. Wore a diamond stickpin and carried a silver-handled walking stick, though he didn't seem to need it for walking. Name was Zeller, if I recall. Roland or Richard Zeller, something like that. Yates nodded, feigning only mild interest while his mind raced. The description matched Nora's surname and would explain her condition and fear. A battered wife on the run would have good reason to be wary of strangers. Any idea where this gentleman went? Yates asked casually. Morris shrugged. Said something about checking Eureka next. Left yesterday morning, I believe. Relief washed over Yates. If the man had left for Eureka, that gave them time. Eureka was a good 2-day ride, and the man would likely spend at least a day there asking questions before potentially doubling back. Much obliged for the information, Yates said, sliding another coin across the bar. Just then, Doc Sullivan entered the saloon, spotted Yates, and made his way over. The doctor was a small man with intelligent eyes and a perpetually worried expression. Mrs. Fletcher said you found a woman in distress, Sullivan said without preamble. Yates nodded. At the hotel, room 5. She's injured, though I'm not certain how badly. I'll head over directly, Sullivan promised. Any idea what happened to her? Yates hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. I suspect she may be running from someone dangerous. The doctor's expression darkened. I see. I'll be discreet. As Sullivan left, Yates ordered food to take back to the hotel. If his suspicions about Nora's situation were correct, they would need to make plans quickly. Eureka was only a temporary detour for a determined man. When Yates returned to the Silver Dollar, Mrs. Fletcher intercepted him in the lobby. The doctor's with her now, she said quietly. Poor thing. Somebody worked her over something fierce. Yates felt a flare of anger. How bad? Bruised ribs, sprained wrist, cuts and bruises elsewhere. Doc says nothing that won't heal with time, but Mrs. Fletcher's lips thinned. It wasn't the first time from the look of some older injuries. Yates nodded grimly. I'd like to speak with her if the doctor's finished. He should be about done, Mrs. Fletcher replied. I've sent up broth and bread. Don't expect she could manage much more tonight. Yates thanked her and climbed the stairs, his mind turning over possibilities. When he knocked softly on Nora's door, it was Sullivan who answered. Ah, Paxton. Come in. The doctor was packing his bag, his movements efficient. I've given Mrs. Zeller something for the pain. She should rest comfortably tonight. Yates glanced toward the bed where Nora sat propped against pillows, her face cleaner now but the bruising along her jaw more evident. Her hair had been brushed and plaited, likely by Mrs. Fletcher's kindly hands. How is she? Yates asked, keeping his voice low. Sullivan's expression was professionally neutral. She'll recover physically. 2 cracked ribs, a sprained wrist, various contusions. She's also suffering from exhaustion and mild dehydration. The doctor hesitated, then added even more quietly, the injuries are consistent with a severe beating, and there are older injuries that suggest this wasn't an isolated incident. Yates nodded, his suspicions confirmed. Thank you, Doc. Sullivan gathered his bag. I'll check on her tomorrow. The laudanum should help her sleep tonight. She needs rest more than anything. After the doctor left, Yates approached the bed cautiously. Nora's eyes were half closed, the medicine already taking effect, but she seemed to recognize him. Mr. Paxton, she murmured. The doctor says you paid him, and Mrs. Fletcher brought food. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." Yates pulled a chair closer to the bed. "No need to worry about that now. How are you feeling?" "Floating," she admitted with the ghost of a smile. "Whatever the doctor gave me is quite effective." "Good," Yates said. He hesitated, then decided directness was best. "Miss Zeller, or is it Mrs. Zeller?" Her eyes widened slightly, then filled with tears. "He found me, didn't he? Richard's here in Ely." "No," Yates assured her quickly. "He was here, asking questions, but he left yesterday for Eureka." Relief washed over her face, quickly followed by renewed fear. "But he'll be back. He always finds me." "Not this time," Yates said firmly. "But I need to understand what we're dealing with if I'm going to help you." Nora struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement jarred her ribs. "Why would you help me? You don't know me, and Richard is. He's a dangerous man, wealthy, connected." "I've dealt with dangerous men before," Yates replied evenly. "Right now, I'm concerned about getting you somewhere safe until you're healed up." Nora looked down at her bandaged wrist. "I married Richard Zeller 3 years ago in Boston. My father arranged the match. Richard owns several successful businesses, and our family needed the connection. He was charming during our courtship, but after the wedding—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "He changed," Yates supplied gently. She nodded. "The first time he hit me was 6 months into our marriage. I had ordered the wrong wine with dinner when his business associates visited. He apologized afterward, said it would never happen again. I believed him. But it did happen again," Yates guessed. "Each time was worse than the last. Each time he was sorry afterward. Each time he promised it was the last time." Her voice had grown stronger as she spoke, as if finally telling her story was giving her courage. "A year ago, he decided to expand his business interests westward. We moved to Denver. I thought perhaps a fresh start would change things." "It didn't," Yates said, not a question. "No. If anything, being farther from society's eyes made him bolder. Last month he—" She hesitated, her hand unconsciously touching her side where the cracked ribs lay beneath bandages. "I thought he might kill me. When he left on a business trip 3 days ago, I took what little money I could find and ran. I caught the stagecoach, but in Austin, I saw a man I recognized as one of Richard's associates. I panicked and slipped away, started walking. I traded my wedding ring for a ride in a farmer's wagon for part of the way, but he could only take me so far." "And that's how you ended up on the road to Ely," Yates finished. Nora nodded, her eyelids growing heavier as the laudanum took firmer hold. "He'll never let me go, Mr. Paxton. A Zeller always collects what belongs to him. That's what Richard says." "You don't belong to anyone, Miss Nora," Yates said firmly. "And Richard Zeller isn't the only one who can be determined." Her eyes drifted closed, but a small smile touched her lips. "You're a strange one, Mr. Paxton. Most men would be riding in the opposite direction by now." "Get some rest," Yates told her. "We'll figure things out in the morning." As Nora slipped into much-needed sleep, Yates sat in the chair by her bed, thinking. Richard Zeller had a day's head start to Eureka, which meant he likely wouldn't return to Ely for at least 3 more days. That gave them time, but not much. Yates had originally planned to head north to the Walker Ranch, but that would have to wait. Instead, he would need to find somewhere safe for Nora to recover, somewhere her husband wouldn't think to look. As he watched her sleeping, Yates admitted to himself that his interest wasn't entirely chivalrous. There was something about Nora Zeller that called to him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps it was the shared understanding of pain, or maybe just her quiet courage in the face of terrible circumstances. Either way, Yates Paxton had made a silent promise when he tied her shoe on that dusty road at sundown. He would see her safe, whatever it took. Morning came with the sound of miners heading to their shifts, the clatter of delivery wagons, and the general bustle of a town waking up. Yates, who had eventually returned to his own room after ensuring Nora was sleeping soundly, rose early and went downstairs to make arrangements. Mrs. Fletcher was already up, brewing coffee in the small kitchen behind the hotel lobby. "Coffee, Mr. Paxton," she offered, holding up a steaming mug. "Much obliged," Yates replied, accepting the drink gratefully. "Mrs. Fletcher, I was wondering if you might help me with something." The older woman's shrewd eyes assessed him. "This about that poor woman upstairs?" "Yes, madam. She's in some trouble with her husband, a dangerous man who's likely to come looking for her. I need to get her somewhere safe, but she's in no condition to travel far." Mrs. Fletcher nodded thoughtfully. "I suspected as much. Those weren't the kind of injuries that come from a fall." She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the small table. "You have a plan." "Working on one," Yates admitted. "I know a place about half a day's ride from here, old trapper's cabin that's still in decent shape. Remote, but not too far from water and game, if I could get some supplies." "My brother owns the mercantile," Mrs. Fletcher said. "I'll have a word with him. What else do you need?" Yates considered. "A way to transport her that won't jostle her ribs too badly. My horse isn't suited for a lady in her condition. Hiram Jenkins has a small wagon he uses for deliveries. Might be willing to loan it out for a good cause." "And discretion," Yates added. "Her husband was already here asking questions. If he comes back—" Mrs. Fletcher's expression hardened. "Men who beat their wives get no information from me, Mr. Paxton, and most folks in Ely feel the same way. We take care of our own out here." "She's not from Ely," Yates pointed out. "She is now," Mrs. Fletcher said firmly. "At least as far as anyone asking will be concerned." Yates smiled, grateful for the woman's staunch support. "Thank you. I'd like to leave as soon as possible. By midday, if she's strong enough. I'll see to the supplies and speak with Hiram about the wagon," Mrs. Fletcher promised. "You focus on getting that girl ready to travel." After finishing his coffee, Yates headed back upstairs to check on Nora. He knocked softly on her door, entering when he heard her quiet acknowledgement. Nora was sitting up in bed, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. In the morning light, Yates could see that it had rich auburn highlights, and her eyes, clearer now without pain or laudanum clouding them, were a deep gray blue. Despite the bruising on her face, she was even more beautiful than he had first thought. "Good morning, Mr. Paxton," she greeted him, her voice stronger than the previous evening. "Miss Nora," he replied with a slight nod. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than I have any right to," she admitted, "though breathing deeply is still rather unpleasant." Yates moved closer to the bed. "Dr. Sullivan should be by to check on you soon, but in the meantime, we need to discuss our next steps." Nora's expression grew serious. "You've already done far more than I could have expected, Mr. Paxton. I can't ask you to involve yourself further in my troubles." "You didn't ask," Yates pointed out. "I'm offering, and it's Yates, please." A faint smile touched her lips. "Yates, then, and you must call me Nora." "Nora," he acknowledged with a small smile of his own. "Your husband will likely return to Ely within a few days. We need to have you safely away by then." Fear flickered in her eyes. "Where would I go? I have almost no money, no family out west. Richard has connections everywhere." "I know a place," Yates told her. "A cabin about half a day's ride from here. It's remote, but comfortable enough. You could recover there while we figure out a more permanent solution." She questioned softly. "If you'll allow it," Yates replied. "I won't leave you to face this alone, Nora." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to understand his motives. Finally, she asked, "Why? Why would you do this for a stranger?" Yates considered his answer carefully. "I've seen what happens when good people turn away from others in need. during the war after. I've done my share of turning away. Maybe I'm tired of it. Something in his honest answer seemed to satisfy her. When do we leave? As soon as Doc Sullivan says you're able. Mrs. Fletcher is arranging supplies and transportation that won't be too hard on your ribs. Nora nodded, then hesitated before asking, what about your plans? Surely you didn't come to Ely intending to rescue a battered wife and hide her in the wilderness. Yates smiled ruefully. I was headed north to the Walker Ranch, heard they might be hiring, but that can wait. I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, Yates interrupted gently. Some things are more important than a job that will still be there in a few weeks. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Dr. Sullivan entered, his bag in hand, and Mrs. Fletcher behind him carrying a tray with porridge and tea. Good morning, Sullivan greeted them. I see my patient is looking considerably better today. While the doctor examined Nora, Yates stepped out to give her privacy. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and considered their situation. The plan was risky. If Richard Zeller was as determined and well-connected as Nora suggested, hiding her wouldn't be easy. But the cabin was known to very few, and with proper precautions, they could remain undetected long enough for her injuries to heal. What came after that was less clear. A woman in Nora's position had few options. Divorce was difficult, expensive, and scandalous. And from what Yates had gathered, her husband wasn't the kind of man who would simply let her walk away. The door opened, and Sullivan emerged, closing it behind him. She's healing as well as can be expected, the doctor told Yates. The ribs will take weeks to fully mend, but the other injuries are superficial. I've left more laudanum for the pain, though she should use it sparingly. Is she strong enough to travel? Yates asked. Sullivan frowned slightly. Ideally, no, but given the circumstances, Mrs. Fletcher explained to me, I understand the necessity. Keep the journey as smooth as possible and ensure she rests frequently. The bandages around her ribs should be changed daily. Can you manage that? I've patched up worse in the field, Yates assured him. Very well, Sullivan conceded. But if her condition worsens, fever, increased pain, difficulty breathing, get her to a doctor immediately. You have my word, Yates promised. Sullivan nodded, apparently satisfied. Mrs. Fletcher is with her now, helping her dress. I believe she's gathered some clothing items that might fit Mrs. Zeller better than her current attire. Thank you, Doc, for everything. Sullivan waved away the thanks. It's my duty. Though I admit I would derive significant professional satisfaction from examining Mr. Zeller's skull with the blunt end of my medical bag should our paths cross. With that surprisingly vehement statement, the usually mild-mannered doctor departed. By midday, their preparations were complete. Hiram Jenkins had indeed provided his delivery wagon, a small but sturdy vehicle with a canvas cover to shield them from the sun. Mrs. Fletcher's brother had supplied provisions: flour, coffee, salt pork, beans, and other essentials that would last them several weeks if carefully rationed. Sullivan had provided additional medical supplies, and Mrs. Fletcher herself had gathered clothing, bedding, and a few books to pass the time during Nora's convalescence. Yates secured his horse to the back of the wagon and helped Mrs. Fletcher settle Nora comfortably on a pallet of blankets in the wagon bed. Despite the laudanum Sullivan had given her to ease the journey, Nora was pale with pain and apprehension. You sure about this, Mr. Paxton? Mrs. Fletcher asked quietly as they stepped away from the wagon. Taking responsibility for her is no small thing. I'm sure, Yates replied without hesitation. Will you send word if her husband returns? Billy Carter rides the mail route past Cottonwood Creek twice a week. I'll send a message with him if there's trouble. She pressed a folded paper into his hand. Map to the old Henderson place in case you need somewhere else to go. It's abandoned now, but the well still has water." "Thank you," Yates said, genuinely moved by the community's willingness to help. Mrs. Fletcher patted his arm. "You bring her back when she's healed up. Ely can use another good woman." With final thanks and farewells, Yates climbed onto the wagon seat and took the reins. They departed from the back of the hotel, avoiding the main street where too many eyes might notice and remember their passing. The journey was slow and careful, Yates choosing the smoothest path possible to minimize jostling Nora's injuries. They spoke little at first, Nora drifting in and out of a laudanum-induced haze. Yates focused on the trail. By late afternoon, they had left the established roads behind, following a nearly invisible trail that wound through scrubby pine and aspen groves into increasingly rugged terrain. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the scent of pine and sage replacing the dust of the valley. "It's beautiful," Nora commented during a lucid moment, gazing out at the sweeping vistas of mountains and valleys. "First time in the high country?" Yates asked. "First time anywhere this remote," she admitted. Richard preferred cities or at least established towns. He found the wilderness uncivilized. "Some might say that's its finest quality," Yates replied with a slight smile. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they finally reached their destination. The cabin was nestled in a small clearing, backed by a steep rocky slope and fronted by a meadow where a small stream meandered through tall grass. The structure itself was modest, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and a small lean-to addition that served as storage. "It's not much," Yates apologized as he helped Nora down from the wagon, supporting her weight carefully. "It's perfect," she replied, her eyes taking in the peaceful setting. "How did you know about this place?" "Belonged to an old trapper named Mackenzie. Saved my life once when I got caught in a blizzard up here. When he died 2 winters back, he had no family to claim it. Few people even remember it exists." Inside, the cabin was dusty but otherwise in good repair. Yates helped Nora to the single bed in the corner while he unloaded their supplies and started a fire to drive away the evening chill. "You should rest," he told her once the cabin was warming. "I'll fix us something to eat." "You've thought of everything," Nora observed, watching as he efficiently organized their provisions. Yates shrugged. "The war taught me to plan ahead, and to value a secure shelter and full stomach." As he prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits from the provisions Mrs. Fletcher had provided, Yates was acutely aware of Nora's presence. The cabin's single room offered little privacy, a fact that hadn't concerned him when planning their escape, but now seemed potentially awkward. "I'll sleep in the lean-to," he said as they ate. "Or outside if the weather's good." "You don't have to do that," Nora protested. "I've already taken your bed." "I've slept on harder ground for less worthy reasons," Yates assured her. "Besides, you need proper rest to heal." After they finished eating, Yates helped Nora change her bandages as Sullivan had instructed. It was an intimate task that he approached with clinical detachment, though he couldn't help noticing the extensive bruising across her torso, and the way she bit her lip to keep from crying out when he tightened the fresh bindings. "I'm sorry," he murmured, working as quickly and gently as possible. "It's not your doing," she replied, her voice strained. When he had finished, Nora took a small dose of laudanum to help her sleep, and Yates retreated outside to tend to his horse and collect more firewood. The night air was cool and clear, stars emerging in breathtaking profusion overhead. Yates sat on a fallen log near the cabin, smoking a cigarette and contemplating their situation. He had acted on impulse, something he rarely did these days, and now found himself responsible for a woman he barely knew. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. There was something about Nora Zeller that stirred long dormant feelings within him, a desire to protect, yes, but also a growing admiration for her quiet courage. The days that followed settled into a simple routine. Yates hunted and fished, maintained the cabin, and cared for Nora's injuries. Nora, limited by her healing ribs, managed small tasks inside the cabin, mending clothing torn during her flight, preparing simple meals when she felt strong enough, and gradually reducing her dependence on the laudanum as her pain lessened. They talked, at first hesitantly and then with increasing openness. Nora spoke of her childhood in Boston, her education at a prestigious girls' school, her passion for literature and art. Yates shared stories of his Texas upbringing, his time as a scout during the war, and his subsequent wandering across the Western territories. "You never settled anywhere?" Nora asked one evening as they sat before the fire, a week into their stay. Yates poked at the embers thoughtfully. "Came close once, had a small spread in Wyoming, cattle, a few horses, even built a proper house, not just a cabin." "What happened? Blizzard of '72, he replied simply. "Lost most of my stock. Then drought the next summer took the rest after that." He shrugged. Seemed easier to move on. "And the woman in Cheyenne?" Nora asked perceptively. "There was someone, wasn't there?" Yates looked up, surprised. "What makes you say that, the way you hesitated just now, and something in your eyes when you speak of Wyoming?" He smiled ruefully. "Elizabeth Hargrove. Daughter of a successful merchant. We were engaged to be married when I lost the ranch. Her father insisted she break it off, said he wouldn't have his daughter tied to a failure." "That's terrible," Nora said softly. "Did you love her?" "Thought I did at the time," Yates admitted. "Looking back, I'm not so sure. We wanted different things in the end. She dreamed of society balls and city living. I wanted open country and quiet." "Like this," Nora suggested, gesturing to the cabin and the wilderness beyond. "Like this," Yates agreed, meeting her eyes across the fire. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of growing feelings neither was quite ready to name. Yates looked away first, rising to add another log to the fire. "Your ribs seem to be healing well," he observed, changing the subject. "Sullivan said it would take weeks, but you're moving more easily already." Nora nodded. "I've always healed quickly. It's a blessing when." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. When one is regularly injured, fast healing is an advantage. "Has he always been violent?" Yates asked carefully. They had spoken little of Richard Zeller since arriving at the cabin. Nora's fingers worried at the edge of the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "There were signs before we married that I was too naive to recognize. He was controlling, possessive. Became angry if I spent too much time with friends or family, but the physical violence didn't start until after the wedding." "What will you do now?" Yates asked. "When you're fully recovered." She looked into the fire, her expression troubled. "I don't know. I have no family who would take me, and my parents died last year, and my only sister is in Europe with her husband. I have no money of my own. Richard made sure of that." "You could stay in Ely," Yates suggested. "Mrs. Fletcher seemed ready to adopt you already. And from what I gather, the town could use a cultured lady like yourself, perhaps teaching." "And when Richard inevitably finds me," Nora countered. "He has resources, connections. He won't simply let me disappear." "Then we'll need to make sure he believes you can't be found," Yates replied, his mind working through possibilities. "People go missing in the West all the time. Accidents, Indian attacks, outlaws." Nora's eyes widened. "You're suggesting we fake my death?" "It might be the only way to ensure he stops looking," Yates said pragmatically. "A grieving husband eventually moves on. A cuckolded one rarely does." The idea took root over the following days. Through Billy Carter, the mail carrier, they sent a discreet message to Mrs. Fletcher, who replied with news that Richard Zeller had indeed returned to Ely and was offering substantial rewards for information about his poor, confused wife. "He's telling everyone I'm mentally unstable," Nora said bitterly after reading Mrs. Fletcher's letter. "That I suffered a breakdown after losing a child and ran away during an episode of hysteria." Yates, who had been cleaning his rifle by the fire, looked up sharply. "Was there a child?" Pain flickered across Nora's face. "A miscarriage, early in our marriage. Richard blamed me. Said I'd done something to cause it deliberately because I wasn't ready for motherhood." "That's absurd," Yates said, setting aside the rifle to move closer to her. "You can't possibly have been responsible." "I know that now," Nora replied quietly, "but at the time I believed him." He was very convincing in his anger. Without thinking, Yates reached out to cover her hand with his own. "He was wrong about that and everything else he made you believe about yourself." Nora looked down at their joined hands, then slowly turned hers to twine her fingers with his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as I truly am, not as he defined me." The touch was simple but profoundly intimate. In the weeks they had spent together in the cabin, they had developed a deep friendship built on mutual respect and growing trust. But this was the first time they had acknowledged the attraction simmering beneath the surface. Yates knew he should pull away. Nora was vulnerable, still healing from both physical and emotional wounds. But when she raised her eyes to his, he saw not vulnerability but clear-eyed certainty. "Nora," he began, his voice rough. "I know what you're going to say," she interrupted gently. "That it's too soon. That I'm confused or grateful or simply reaching for comfort. But I've spent 3 years with a man who made me doubt every thought and feeling I had. Now, for the first time in so long, I'm absolutely certain of something." "And what's that?" Yates asked, his heart beating faster. "That whatever happens next, whether we succeed in freeing me from Richard or not, I will never regret meeting you on that road at Sundown." Yates raised his free hand to her face, gently tracing the line of her cheek where the bruises had finally faded. "Nor I you." The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. When Nora responded, her lips soft and yielding beneath his, Yates felt something long frozen within him begin to thaw. They drew apart after a moment, both slightly breathless. "We should take this slowly," Yates said, though it took considerable willpower to say the words. Nora nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Slowly," she agreed, "but not too slowly. I've had enough of life passing me by while I wait for permission to live it." With the growing certainty of their feelings for each other came renewed determination to secure Nora's freedom. The plan they developed was risky but feasible. They would stage evidence of Nora's death in a remote ravine where flash floods were common, leaving enough personal items to be convincing while ensuring no body would ever be found. "Mrs. Fletcher can help spread the story," Yates explained as they finalized the details. "A tragedy, the poor, confused woman wandering into dangerous territory, swept away by sudden floodwaters. And Richard will have no reason to continue searching," Nora concluded. "A dead wife serves his purposes just as well as a living one. He can play the grieving widower, perhaps even benefit financially from my demise. Once he's gone, we'll need to move you somewhere he's unlikely to look, at least for a time," Yates continued. "I have friends in Montana Territory who could use a school teacher in their settlement. It's remote but growing. You could build a new life there. Nora corrected softly, "a new life for us if you're willing." Yates looked at her in surprise. "You'd want that?" "A life with a wandering cowboy with no prospects." "I've had prosperity without happiness," Nora replied. "I'd rather have happiness, even with uncertainty. Before Yates could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, several horses moving at speed toward the cabin. "Stay inside," Yates ordered, grabbing his rifle and moving to the window. Through the gathering dusk, he could make out 3 riders approaching from the direction of Ely. "Who is it?" Nora asked, fear evident in her voice. "Can't tell yet," Yates replied grimly. "But they're in a hurry, and that's rarely good news." As the riders drew closer, Yates recognized Billy Carter in the lead. The other 2 men were strangers to him, but their manner alert, hands near their weapons, suggested trouble. "Stay back from the windows," Yates told Nora as he moved to the door, "and be ready to run for the trees if I tell you to." With his rifle ready, Yates stepped onto the cabin's small porch as the riders pulled up a short distance away. "Evening, Paxton," Billy called, raising a hand in greeting. "Sorry to drop in unannounced, but we've got trouble." "What kind?" Yates asked, not lowering his rifle. "Zeller kind," Billy replied grimly. "He's hired guns, professional trackers. They're combing the hills, asking questions at every homestead and mining camp within 50 miles of Ely." Yates's stomach tightened. "How'd they know to look out here?" "They didn't specifically," one of the other men said, dismounting. He was older, with a weather-beaten face and the watchful eyes of a lawman. "Name's Hawkins, U.S., Marshal out of Carson City, Mrs. Fletcher sent word when Zeller's men started getting rough with the locals. Thought you might need some official assistance." Yates lowered his rifle slightly. "Obliged for the warning, but I'm not sure what a marshal can do in this situation." Hawkins approached slowly, hands visible. "More than you might think. I've been tracking Richard Zeller for months. The man's wanted in connection with financial fraud in Denver and Salt Lake City. The Treasury Department's very interested in his business dealings." "He's a criminal?" Nora asked, appearing in the doorway behind Yates. The marshal nodded. "Mrs. Zeller, I presume?" "Yes, madam. Your husband's been using his legitimate businesses to cover a substantial counterfeiting operation. We've been building a case, but he's careful and well protected." "How does that help us?" Yates asked, still wary. "It means I have the authority to take Mrs. Zeller into protective custody as a material witness," Hawkins explained. "And it means her husband has considerably more to worry about than finding his runaway wife." Billy Carter dismounted as well. "Marshal Hawkins arrived in Ely yesterday, asking discreet questions. Mrs. Fletcher pointed him my way. Figured we'd better ride out and warn you Zeller's men were seen heading this direction earlier today." The third rider, who had remained mounted, suddenly raised his hand for silence. "Riders coming," he said quietly. "At least 4, maybe 5. Yates quickly assessed their options. The cabin was defensible but isolated. If Zeller's men found them, there would be no easy escape. "How official is your presence here, Marshal?" Yates asked. "Official enough," Hawkins replied, understanding the question. "I have warrants and jurisdiction, but there are more of them than us, and I'd prefer to avoid a shooting war if possible." Nora stepped forward, her face resolute. "Then we use the plan we already developed. Let them believe I perished in the ravine. Billy knows the location we selected." "It might work," Hawkins agreed thoughtfully. "If they find evidence of a tragedy, they'll have no reason to continue the search, and without Mrs. Zeller to testify, Zeller might let down his guard, give us the opening we need to catch him in the act." "You're asking her to disappear completely," Yates pointed out. "To let her husband believe she's dead while you build your case." "It would only be temporary," Hawkins assured them. "Once we have Zeller in custody, Mrs. Zeller could come forward safely. The Treasury Department would ensure her protection." "How long?" Nora asked. Hawkins hesitated. "Hard to say. Weeks, possibly months. These cases take time to build properly." The sound of approaching riders grew louder. They had minutes at most to decide. "We need to move now," Billy urged. "Whatever we're doing, we need to do it fast." Nora looked at Yates, her expression determined. "I trust you," she said simply. "Whatever you think is best." Yates made his decision quickly. "Billy, take Nora to the ravine as we planned. Leave the evidence we prepared. Marshal Hawkins, you and your man ride with them as far as the fork in the trail, then double back. Make it look like you're tracking something toward the ravine." "And you?" Nora asked, concern in her voice. "I'll stay here, make it look like I've been living alone," Yates replied. "If they believe I'm just a solitary trapper, they'll have no reason to connect me to you." "It's too dangerous," Nora protested. "If they recognize you from Ely, they won't," Yates assured her, though he was less certain than he sounded. "And it will look suspicious if the cabin is suddenly abandoned." Marshal Hawkins nodded in agreement. "He's right. This is our best play, Mrs. Zeller. Gather only what you absolutely need. We need to move quickly." The next few minutes passed in a blur of urgent activity. Nora packed a small bag with essential items while Yates and the others removed all evidence of her presence from the cabin. When they were finished, Yates helped Nora mount behind Billy on his horse. "I'll find you," Yates promised, holding her hand tightly. "Once this is over, I'll find you." "I know you will," Nora replied, tears in her eyes despite her brave smile. "You found me once already, remember?" At sundown, on the road to Ely. With a final squeeze of her hand, Yates stepped back and watched as the small party rode away into the gathering darkness, taking a less obvious trail that led eventually to the ravine where they had planned to stage Nora's tragic death. Alone in the cabin, Yates quickly arranged things to support his cover story, a solitary trapper living off the land. He hid Nora's few remaining possessions beneath a loose floorboard, kept his rifle within reach, and settled in to wait. The confrontation, when it came, was mercifully brief. 4 hard-faced men approached the cabin cautiously, calling out before they reached the clearing. Yates played his part, the suspicious, territorial mountain man reluctant to offer hospitality, but ultimately allowing them to water their horses and ask their questions. "Seen anyone pass through these parts recently?" the leader asked, a tall man with a scar running from eye to jaw. "A woman, dark hair, traveling alone or maybe with a man." Yates frowned as if considering. "Can't say as I have. Not much traffic up this way, especially not women folk." "What's she done?" "Nothing," the scarred man replied too quickly. "Family matter. Her husband's worried sick about her." "Must be some family matter to bring armed men this deep into the hills," Yates observed, deliberately obtuse. The men exchanged glances, clearly growing impatient. "You sure you haven't seen anyone?" the scarred man pressed. "Husband's offering a substantial reward for information." Yates shook his head. "Been here since spring, hunting and trapping. Only folks I've seen are the mail carrier and the occasional prospector. Sorry I can't help you gents." "Your family matter ain't my concern." After a few more questions and a cursory glance around the cabin's exterior, the men departed, heading in the general direction of the ravine. Yates watched them go with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The first hurdle had been cleared, but much depended on whether they found and believed the evidence of Nora's death. He waited a tense hour before saddling his horse and following at a discreet distance. From a concealed position on a ridgeline, he watched as the men discovered the items Billy and Nora had left at the ravine: a torn shawl caught on rocks, a woman's boot, personal items scattered along the edge of the wash, where flash floods regularly swept through. The men searched the area thoroughly, even sending one of their number downstream to look for a body. When none was found, they seemed to accept the obvious conclusion: the woman they sought had met with tragedy in the unforgiving wilderness. Yates continued to observe as they gathered the evidence and departed, presumably to report back to Richard Zeller. Only when they were well out of sight did he return to the cabin, packing his own essential belongings. He couldn't risk remaining there now. If Zeller had any doubts about his wife's fate, the cabin would be the first place he'd look for further information. By dawn, Yates was miles away, following a little-used trail northward. Marshal Hawkins had arranged to meet him in 2 days at an old mining camp to share news and determine their next steps. Until then, all Yates could do was ride and hope that their plan had worked, that Richard Zeller would accept his wife's apparent death and return to his business affairs in Denver. The mining camp was a collection of dilapidated structures that had been abandoned when the silver vein played out 5 years earlier. Yates arrived first, setting up camp in what had once been the assay office, its stone walls providing better shelter than the wooden buildings that had succumbed to weather and neglect. Marshal Hawkins arrived the following evening, alone. "Where's Nora?" Yates demanded as soon as the marshal dismounted. "Safe," Hawkins assured him. "I have her and Billy Carter at a secure location near Carson City. Treasury agents are with them." "Did Zeller believe it?" Yates asked. "The accident," Hawkins nodded, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "Seems so. He identified the personal effects as belonging to his wife, put on quite a show of grief, even arranged for a memorial service in Ely before departing for Denver yesterday." Relief washed over Yates. "So it worked." "For now," Hawkins cautioned, "but we still have work to do if Mrs. Zeller is to have any chance at a normal life afterward. Zeller needs to be behind bars or he'll always be a threat to her." "What do you need from me?" Yates asked. The marshal studied him thoughtfully. "You care for her, don't you? More than just helping a stranger in need." Yates saw no point in denial. "Yes." "Then I need you to be patient," Hawkins said, "and careful. My agents will take Mrs. Zeller to San Francisco, where she'll be safe while we build our case against her husband. It could take months, as I said before." "I want to go with her," Yates stated flatly. Hawkins shook his head. "Too risky. Zeller may believe his wife is dead, but he's seen you. If he has men watching for potential witnesses, seeing you in San Francisco could raise questions we don't want asked. So I'm just supposed to wait?" Yates asked, frustration evident in his voice. "Not exactly," Hawkins replied. "I have a proposition for you. The Treasury Department could use a man with your skills, someone who knows the territory, can move unnoticed, has experience with tracking and observation." "You're offering me a job." "A temporary assignment," Hawkins clarified. "Help us gather intelligence on Zeller's operation in Denver. With your assistance, we might cut months off our investigation time." Yates considered the offer. It would mean placing himself in potential danger, close to a man who would certainly kill him if he discovered Yates's connection to Nora. But it would also mean actively working toward her freedom rather than passively waiting. "I'd be able to communicate with Nora?" he asked. "Carefully, through secure channels," Hawkins confirmed. "No direct contact, but you'd know she's safe and she'd know you're working to resolve this." "When do we start?" Yates asked, his decision made. The next 3 months were among the most challenging of Yates's life. Under an assumed identity as a drifting cowhand looking for work, he insinuated himself into the periphery of Richard Zeller's world in Denver. He took odd jobs at businesses connected to Zeller's enterprises, observed routines and patterns, and passed information to Treasury agents through carefully arranged dead drops. Throughout, his only contact with Nora came through encoded messages delivered by Hawkins's network brief communications, confirming her safety and well-being in San Francisco, where she had established a cover identity as a young widow teaching at a girls' school. Yates was meticulous in his work, painfully aware that a single mistake could unravel everything. He maintained his distance from Zeller himself, focusing instead on the man's associates and operations. The evidence they gathered revealed a sophisticated counterfeiting ring with connections across several Western territories, and Richard Zeller at its center. The breakthrough came in early December, when Yates discovered the location of the printing press where the counterfeit currency was produced. Hidden in the basement of a warehouse, ostensibly used for storing paper goods, the operation was substantial and professional. Marshal Hawkins moved quickly once this information was confirmed. Treasury agents raided the warehouse, arresting several of Zeller's associates and seizing equipment and counterfeit bills worth thousands of dollars. Zeller himself was apprehended at his home, attempting to destroy incriminating documents. "It's over," Hawkins told Yates the following day as they met in a small hotel room away from the main activity. "Zeller's in custody along with most of his organization. The evidence is overwhelming." "Will it stick?" Yates asked, knowing that wealthy men often found ways to escape justice. "This time, yes," Hawkins assured him. "Counterfeiting is a federal crime with severe penalties, and we have multiple witnesses prepared to testify against him, including former associates who are eager to make deals to reduce their own sentences." "What about Nora? When can I see her?" "Soon," Hawkins promised. "We need her formal statement about Zeller's activities, both business and personal. The abuse she suffered will help establish his character before the court. Once that's done, you'll be free to go to her." "She'll be safe," Yates pressed, "even after testifying." "Zeller won't see freedom again in this lifetime," Hawkins said confidently. "And even if he somehow managed it, he'll be a ruined man. His assets are being seized, his reputation destroyed. The power he held over Mrs. Zeller is broken." True to his word, Hawkins arranged for Yates to travel to San Francisco 2 weeks later, after Nora had given her statement to federal prosecutors. The journey by train was the longest of Yates's life, each mile simultaneously bringing him closer to Nora and increasing his apprehension about their reunion. 3 months was a long time. People changed, circumstances shifted, feelings evolved. What if Nora had adapted to her new life in the city? What if she had reconsidered the hasty connection they had formed in the isolated cabin? What if the woman who had come to mean everything to him no longer felt the same? These doubts plagued him until the moment he stepped off the train in San Francisco, scanning the crowded platform for a familiar face. The city was decorated for Christmas, garlands and lights festooning the station, the scent of pine and spiced cider in the air. And then he saw her. Nora stood near a pillar, her dark hair styled in a more fashionable arrangement than he remembered, her dress modest but well-made. She looked healthy, the haunted thinness gone from her face, her posture straight and confident. For a terrible moment, she seemed like a stranger, a poised city woman who belonged to a world far removed from his own. Then she spotted him, and her face transformed with such joy that all his doubts vanished in an instant. They moved toward each other through the crowd, hesitating when only a few feet separated them. In public, surrounded by strangers, the passionate reunion Yates had imagined seemed suddenly impossible. "Hello, Yates," Nora said softly, her eyes searching his face as if memorizing it anew. "Hello, Nora," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You look well." "As do you," she returned, though the shadows under his eyes suggested the months had not been entirely kind. "I've missed you terribly." Such a simple statement, yet it contained everything he needed to hear. "And I you." Every day. A Treasury agent who had accompanied Nora to the station cleared his throat discreetly. Perhaps we should continue to Mrs. Zeller's residence, where you can speak more privately." The apartment where Nora had been living during her time in San Francisco was small but pleasant, located in a respectable neighborhood near the school where she had been teaching. Once the Treasury agent had discreetly departed, promising to return the following day, they were finally blissfully alone. "I was afraid," Nora admitted as they sat together in her small parlor, "that you might have changed your mind, or—" "Never," Yates assured her, taking her hands in his. Not for a moment. The kiss that followed was nothing like the tentative exchange they had shared in the cabin. This was the culmination of months of separation, uncertainty, and longing, deep, passionate, and completely certain. When they finally drew apart, breathless, Nora rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she asked. "Richard will be in prison. The Treasury Department no longer needs my testimony. I'm free, truly free, for the first time in years." "That's entirely up to you," Yates replied. "You could stay here in San Francisco. You seem to have built a good life. The school clearly values your teaching." Nora searched his face. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," Yates said slowly, "is to be wherever you are, but I'm not a city man, Nora, never have been, never will be. So I suppose what I'm asking is whether you could be happy somewhere wilder, more open, somewhere like Montana, perhaps, where you have friends who could use a school teacher," Nora recalled, smiling. "I remember." "It would be a simpler life than this," Yates warned. "Harder in some ways. The winters are harsh, amenities few." "And you would be there?" Nora asked. "Every day," Yates promised. "If you'll have me." Nora's smile deepened. "I fell in love with you in a one-room cabin in the Nevada wilderness, Yates Paxton. The circumstances might have been unusual, but my feelings are entirely genuine. Wherever you go, that's where I want to be." "Then marry me," Yates said, the words emerging before he could overthink them. "Not because you need protection or security, but because we choose each other. Freely." Nora's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 days later in a small ceremony at the City Hall with Marshall Hawkins and Mrs. Fletcher, who had traveled from Ely specifically for the occasion, as their witnesses. The next day, they boarded a train bound north, the first leg of their journey to Montana territory and their new life together. Spring came early to the valley where Yates and Nora established their home. The small community of Pine Ridge welcomed them warmly. Yates for his reputation as a fair and skilled horseman, Nora for her education and willingness to take on teaching duties for the settlement's growing population of children. The cabin they built was larger and more comfortable than the trapper's shelter, where they had first acknowledged their feelings, though still modest by Eastern standards. It stood on a gentle rise overlooking a river, with mountains framing the horizon and endless sky above. "It's perfect," Nora declared when they first saw the land, still covered in snow but promising in its possibilities. "It feels like freedom." Over the months that followed, they built not just a home but a life together. Yates raised horses, developing a small but respected breeding operation. Nora taught in the community's one-room schoolhouse and planted an ambitious garden that flourished under her determined care. They made friends, became integral parts of the growing settlement, and gradually put the shadows of the past behind them. News occasionally reached them of Richard Zeller. He had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for counterfeiting and fraud. His assets had been seized, his business empire dismantled. The man who had once wielded so much power over Nora's life was now powerless himself. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked Nora one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. "Leaving Boston, civilization, Nora considered the question seriously, as she did all things. "I regret the years I spent in fear," she replied at last. "I regret believing I was somehow less than I am. But no, I don't regret finding my way here to this life. With you." She rested her hand on her gently rounded belly, their first child due to arrive with the winter snows. "I found something I never expected that day on the road to Ely. Not just safety or freedom, but purpose, happiness, love." Yates covered her hand with his own, still marveling at the miracle of their child growing within her. "When I found you at sundown that day, I had no idea I was really finding myself," he admitted. "The man I was meant to be." As the last light faded from the western sky, they sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the home they had built together from both necessity and choice. The road from that dusty Nevada trail to this peaceful Montana valley had been long and sometimes dangerous, but neither would have changed a single step of the journey. After all, it had led them exactly where they were meant to be together, under an endless sky, with a future as wide open as the frontier itself.